Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. My name is Councillor Nick Stavrou and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Mayor, Councillor Wes Gold, Councillor Di Gillies, and on the other side of the horseshoe table we have Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger, and Councillor Victor Franco. I also acknowledge our Director of Urban Living, or Acting Director of Urban Living, Ms. Janine Neuhausen, and Acting Director of Urban, and to my right, our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr. Brian Wee, to my left. There are other officers in attendance tonight and they'll be introduced as they present their reports. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on Council YouTube to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting has also been recorded and will be made available on Council YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer, and I will then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and suggest an alternative approach that will satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or details in the officer's report. There's a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair I can vary the time, I will seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will make this sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take the opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wee. Adoption and confirmation of the minutes. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee held on the 5th of June 2023? Councillor Gold.
As submitted, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gillies.
Seconded, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillors, is there anybody opposed to this? There be no opposition. I put the motion to the vote. Are those in favour? I declare the motion carried. Thank you, councillors. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? There be no conflict of interest. We'll move to the substantive part of the agenda, presentation of officer reports. Tonight we have 2 items. The first item is item 3.1, the Baldwin Interwar Heritage Assessment Amendment C386 Borough, consideration of panel report. This will be presented by Mr. Emil Dixon. Mr. Dixon, please proceed.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, councillors, officers and attendees. Amendment C386 seeks to apply the heritage overlay to 1 heritage precinct and 4 individually significant places in Baldwin and Deep Dean, comprising the Gordon Street precinct, 7 homes on Gordon Street, Baldwin, 41 Austin Street, Baldwin, 221 Whitehorse Road, Baldwin, 5 Creswick Street, Deep Dean, and 6 Creswick Street, Deep Dean. On 6th of March 2023, a report was considered by the Urban Planning Delegated Committee on the outcomes of the exhibition process for Amendment C386, which ran from November to December 2022. Through the exhibition process, 6 submissions were received, including 4 submissions opposing heritage protection and 2 submissions supporting heritage protection. Key issues raised in the submissions related to inconsistencies between findings of earlier studies, the heritage value of the properties, inaccuracies in the heritage citations, a lack of intactness of the Gordon Street precinct, the level of change in the area, potential for increased maintenance costs, concerns regarding rent valuation, and the transparency of the amendment process. The UPDC resolved to refer the amendment to an independent planning panel for consideration. The planning panel process was undertaken between the 1st and 2nd of May 2023, and the panel report was received by officers on the 26th of May 2023. The independent planning panel supports the inclusion of the Gordon Street precinct and 3 of the 4 individually significant properties in the heritage overlay. The panel does not support the inclusion of 6 Creswick Street Deep Dean in the heritage overlay. Regarding 6 Creswick Street, the panel agreed with the opposing submitter's heritage expert that criterion A, historical significance, was not met, as the home's construction date did not demonstrate a clear association with interwar bungalows that formed the residential and commercial growth period of the 1920s and 30s. The panel also agreed with the opposing submitter's heritage expert that criterion D, or representativeness, was not met, as alterations to the home had diminished its importance as an individually significant example of a Federation-style home. Furthermore, regarding number 5, Creswick Street Deep Dean, while the panel does recommend its inclusion in the heritage overlay, the panel also recommends minor changes to the heritage citation and statement of significance. These changes would remove references to the home being a rare and surviving example by builder Dunlop and Hunt. In summary, the panel recommends adoption of Amendment C386, subject to the deletion of 6 Creswick Street Deep Dean from the amendment and minor changes to the citation and statement of significance for 5 Creswick Street, which are outlined in the UPDC report. Officers recommend the UPDC resolve to receive and acknowledge the panel's report as it relates to Amendment C386, updating the amendment consistent with the panel recommendations and referring the amendment to an ordinary meeting of Council for adoption. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Tonight we have 2 people that have indicated to wish to make a submission, one of which is actually circulated to all councillors. I might ask a question. Has everybody read the report? If everybody's read the report, I will refrain from reading it to save some time, as it's not needed. The other person that's indicated they wish to speak tonight is Mr. Greg Price. Mr. Price, if you could proceed to the horseshoe table, reminding you that we have... Oh, apologies for that.
It's Thomas Jolly.
Sorry, Mr. Price. It's Thomas Jolly is the other person that's wishing to speak. Could you please proceed to the horseshoe table? Reminding that there are 3 minutes for the submission, and please commence with your name and suburb. Thank you, Mr. Jolly.
Thank you. I'll just have a drink. It's nerve-wracking to address a group like this when you're not accustomed to doing it. Thank you.
We're all very nice, I can assure you. Please proceed with your name and suburb.
Okay. My name is Tom Jolly. My submission tonight, Tom Jolly, 6 Creswick Street, Deep Dean. My submission tonight is in regard to the proposed heritage overlay of 6 Creswick Street. I am asking 2 things of the Council: that you accept the recommendation of the Planning Panels Victoria and your Council officers by removing my house from the proposed heritage overlay, that you reflect both as individuals and as governing collective body on the extraordinarily unfair and imbalanced heritage process I've been subjected to. Planning Panels Victoria, the expert and independent body which you voted should have final say in this matter, agrees my property should not be included in this heritage overlay. This decision was based on an impartial, fair assessment of all information presented to them from your expert witness, my expert heritage architect, and my town planning advocate. I sat here previously and addressed yourselves on 2 occasions in an attempt to explain that the report written by GML Heritage was inaccurate and embellished. I cooperated with GML Heritage, allowing them to visit my property in an attempt to correct their errors. I emailed each councillor individually and at my own expense, sought a second opinion from heritage consultant Bryce Rayworth. I emailed each councillor a copy of this report. I even suggested that the council engage an opinion from a third heritage consultant to avoid the cost of a panel hearing. Despite this, my requests to yourselves were ignored and you still voted unanimously to send the matter to a panel hearing. Not once did you personally contact me, visit my house,
Mr. Jolly,
or question the impact.
Sorry to interrupt you. These are matters of history, and I did say not to sort of go on to the matters of history.
I suffered from this, and the impact should be understood by the councillors when you choose to ignore the information I give you, the ramifications that has on me personally and other people, ratepayers. Can I finish?
You may, but please refrain as much as you can.
How am I going for time?
I will give you the time you need, but
Thank
please.
you. Although you might, despite my request, although you might think I was not forced to spend money on expert witnesses or an advocate navigating this process and ensuring I had a fair chance against a lawyer, an expert witness supplied by the council, not only has the process personally cost me $30,000, no doubt the cost of the ratepayer was greater than this, given the representation at the panel hearing. I have been informed by your council officers that this heritage study originated off a single email from a local resident who nominated a series of homes in Deepdene. One email from a non-expert community member has triggered a chain of events that has resulted in immense emotional and financial strain to me. There has to be some accountability and reflection. Yourselves as individuals, your heritage consultant, your lawyer, not one of you are personally out of pocket, but this process forced me to defend my house at great expense. I encourage you to analyse seriously and give merit where merit is due to all material represented to you in future. I thank you for your time and ask that you accept the recommendation of the Planning Panel Victoria and your council officers by removing my house from your proposed heritage overlay.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. There appear not to be any questions from the councillors. You may return back to your seat in the gallery. Thank you very much. Good. Move back now to officers for matters arising.
Thank you, Chair. We acknowledge the concerns raised by Mr. Jolly, but they've been addressed in the report, in the body of the EPDC report already, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? There have been no questions. I'm seeking for... Oh, there is a question.
I have a question.
Councillor Franco, I didn't see you on the screen. That's...
Thank you. Mr. Jolly said that the decision to proceed initially was as a consequence of a single resident sending an email in. Could you, through you, Chair, explain how that process... I'd be very interested to understand what the process was and whether that was the case.
Thank you. Through your chair. As it relates to 6 Creswick Street, that was nominated by a community member. So that was an email that was submitted with concerns about potential heritage on the property, and it was investigated subsequently as part of that, as part of a broader study that was then engaged with GML Heritage. I can't really add much more to that. That was the process that's generally accepted when things are nominated, and if they're looked at by a heritage expert and they appear to have potential heritage significance, they're investigated further on the basis of those nominations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Councillor Sinfield.
If there are no further questions, I'm ready with a motion when the time is right.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. There are no more questions. You may move your motion.
Sorry, Chair. I've got just a question. I snuck in at the last minute. Question through you to officers. How often does this council or heritage advisors to council find a different opinion to the independent planning panel?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'm not sure I could give you an accurate reflection of that at the moment. I think it's probably, well, it would be rare, but to what degree the panel doesn't agree with heritage experts. So I'd probably have to take that on notice and give you further advice later.
And just a follow-up question. In instances where the planning panel does have a difference of opinion to council's heritage advisor, do we get a second opinion? And if we do, why haven't we here?
Through you, Chair. Not in our experience, recent experience, have we sought a second opinion when the panel has recommended alternative.
And if I can have just one more, Chair, sorry, just on that same topic.
Yes,
on the basis that we adopt and move to put this back to the Minister to Gazette, how often does the Minister accept council's decision over his own independent planning panel?
I would say very rarely. I'm not sure if there would be any examples we'd know of.
So very rarely that he would accept council's position over the...
No, yes. Rare that he would accept council's position over their own panel recommendation. If we were to recommend...
But this is that not what's being put in front of us at the moment?
No. We're agreeing with the panel's recommendation to remove...
To remove it,
yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. There've been no further questions. Councillor Sinfield, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. And Councillor Watson?
Happy to second that motion.
Thank you for that. Councillors, is anybody opposed?
Can I just ask a question?
Sure,
Sorry,
Councillor Harris. It's late, but I'd let you ask the question.
Just looking at it, does it clearly say exclude 6 Creswick? I suppose it sort of does, but...
Do you want to scroll down?
I'm happy to amend the motion on the screen if councillors are more comfortable with that, and I did propose that to officers this morning, and I was told that the motion was comprehensive.
Yeah. Can we confirm that the motion is actually excluding that property? That's how I understood it, but could we confirm that?
That's correct, Chair. So the motion refers to the UPDC report, and in the UPDC report, the recommendations are to remove 6 Creswick Street from the amendment.
I'm in your hands, councillors. If you wish to make it more clear and highlight that, Councillor Sinfield, you may.
I would be more comfortable with that, as per my correspondence with Mr Costello this morning, if officers might come up with some words to make sure that the community are confident that 6 Creswick is excluded.
And I'm happy to second that if there's no...
There's already been seconded, Councillor Thompson. And are you happy to accept that, Councillor
Yeah, I'll
Watson?
accept that amendment.
No problem. Thank you. That will be the substantive amendment now and the substantive motion.
We might just need to give officers a moment to put a clause up there.
Can I seek a point of clarification from you, Chair? Just, are we adding words to make it clear that number 6 Creswick is not included, to make it precise in the motion? Is that correct?
My understanding is that in the report it is very clear, but Councillor Sinfield seeks to make it clear in the motion that that is indeed the case.
I think it helps making it the point in the motion, because the motion is what's read in future as an immediate thing, and not going back and trying to reconstruct attached reports.
Absolutely, and Councillor Watson has accepted it.
Clause 2 has been amended.
Councillor Sinfield, are you comfortable as it is? And Councillor Watson?
I am.
So we have a mover and a seconder. So this is where we are, councillors. So now, is anybody opposed when you have the time to read it and digest it?
The only change is to the second half of Clause 2.
Okay. I think we can all agree that's a better addition. It makes everything more clear. So on that basis...
Sorry, if with your indulgence.
Councillor Holmesworth, yes?
So just with dot point 2, where it says as annexed in the minutes, should it be as annexed in the officer's report?
I think you're quite right.
Because we haven't actually got minutes of this meeting yet. Yeah. Technicality, thank you.
Sorry. Yes. It is annexed in the minutes because the resolution will form part of that.
Sorry, I understand, but we're not making a decision on the minutes, we're making a decision on the officer's recommendation. I don't mean to be pedantic, but just for clarity.
Sorry, through you, Chair. So when you're reading the minutes, the principle is that you should be able to pick up the minutes and be able to actually read the motion and the resolution in its entirety without having to go back to the agenda. So that way, this particular document, which indicates that that property will be removed, will be annexed to the minutes and it will form part of that decision.
Thank you. Look, I accept your expertise in this area, so thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. There being no opposition, Councillor Sinfield, as the mover, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Chair. I will just speak briefly to it, and I appreciate the contribution of other councillors around the table in providing that clarity in the motion. I think it's important for the owner, Mr Jolly in this instance, and the community to be able to clearly articulate and understand from this motion what we are intending. I appreciate the efforts of Mr Dixon and the team in relation to this study and appreciate the advice of the heritage experts that have fed into this process. It is disappointing that the panel found and recommended to remove Cora Lynn, 6 Creswick Street, Deepdene, from the amendment. And I note that this lovely Federation-style home has been well maintained, and Mr Jolly is to be commended for his efforts in doing so and for the aesthetic and amenity value that the home affords the Creswick Street neighbourhood. It was the first home in the street, and its beautiful asymmetrical built form with a return veranda with a splayed corner and turned posts certainly add to the street and the look and feel of Deepdene. I don't know that much more is to be said. I think the Gordon Street precinct is in Maranoa Ward, and Councillor Watson may like to speak to that if the Chair affords her the opportunity, but I note that it is unopposed, so I commend the motion to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Watson, if you wish to speak, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just briefly, noting that, yes, there are several properties that on this list here for listing for heritage significance, and they are in the Maranoa Ward. So I note that there's been fairly broad-scale support in the community for heritage listing of these properties, and thank my community for their support and commend this motion to my colleagues, thanking the officers for all the work that they've done along the way in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much to the officers and to the presenters. We'll move now to item number 3.2. Item 3.2, 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn, adoption of citation and request for authorisation, permanent heritage overlay. This report is presented by Mr Nick Brennan. Mr Brennan? Oh, it all makes it exciting. Mr Costello. Thank you, Mr Costello.
Thank you, Chair. and through you. Good evening, councillors, officers and attendees. The purpose of this report is to inform the Urban Planning Delegated Committee of an application to demolish the property at 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn, and to seek a resolution to request authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to place a permanent heritage overlay over the property. The draft Balwyn and Balwyn North Heritage Study was prepared by Council, or for Council by heritage consultancy Built Heritage in 2015. It recommended 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn for further investigation. Following preliminary consultation, Council resolved in September 2015 to not proceed with the study. In March 2017, Council resolved to carry out a peer review of the draft study. Stages 1 and 2 of the peer review were completed through Amendment C276, gazetted in July 2019, and Amendment C315, gazetted December 2020, respectively. Stage 3 of the peer review will be implemented through Amendment C398. 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn was recommended for protection through the Stage 1 peer review process, but was not pursued through the planning scheme amendment process at that time due to having a built date of later than 1945. However, the recommendation to include the property in the heritage overlay was retained. On 23rd of May 2023, Council received an application to demolish the property under Section 29A of the Building Act. In response, the application has been suspended and a request has been lodged with the Minister for Planning to apply an interim heritage overlay to the property in accordance with Council's adopted Section 29A decision-making process. To date, the Minister has not made a decision on the request. Officers from the Department of Transport and Planning have advised that a request for authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to apply a permanent heritage overlay must be lodged by Council to support the interim heritage overlay request. Officers at the department have also advised that the permanent heritage overlay for 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn can be incorporated into the existing authorisation request for Amendment C398, which is Stage 3 of the Balwyn peer review, as this is another individually significant property within Balwyn. Officers are therefore proposing an alternative recommendation to that printed with the agenda. It is recommended the UPDC resolve to adopt the draft citation for 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn, and to submit an updated request for authorisation of Amendment C398 incorporating 25 Burrows Road, Balwyn into that amendment. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mr Costello. There are also two people that have wished to make a submission this evening. One again has been by circulation, and I asked the councillors if they've received it all, and everybody has read it, so I don't wish to read it for the same reason as before. The other person that's made a submission to speak is Mr Greg Price. Mr Price, if you could find your way to the horseshoe table. Again, it's 3 minutes. And if you could start by your name and suburb. Thank you very much.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Greg Price from Glen Iris. I'm objecting to this amendment or proposed amendment on the grounds of procedural fairness. Essentially, you heard part of the history of it, but essentially, during the original Balwyn study, it didn't end up in the it ended up on the list of 40 properties which weren't part of the filtered master list, so it wasn't high priority or important, and then that was abandoned. And then in 2016, the citation was created. So we're talking 7 years ago. The citation's not glowing. It's essentially a largely unknown architect and a bespoke design. Then the peer review was decided upon, and supposedly the master list would be reviewed by February 2018 and draft citations completed within 3 to 4 months. And the recommendation was that all properties go back on the interest layer, which we've talked about before. Ultimately, the property was recommended as part of the Peer 1 review, but was removed. It appears that nothing has been done since then other than leaving it with unofficial controls. So it's now 6 years later, and somebody wants to actually, is proceeding on the controls, and they're about to be blocked. There's no new information. It's a 6-year-old citation that council's had adequate time to go and file an amendment and get some controls on this. So I think it's unfair to the owners to be left in limbo for so long while essentially processes are manipulated. There are legislated planning controls, but having the secret heritage interest layer is not part of that. The interest layer is not mentioned in the planning or heritage pages on Council's website, nor in the legislation, and the properties on the interest layer are not included on the schedule of gradings. You can't find any mention of it unless you dig through minutes of meetings. And I believe that this is just another way that, you know, the legislative controls are being usurped. There have been opportunities to protect this property, and I have to side with residents that they want to go and act on these things in the proper ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Price. Councillor Park, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Mr Price, have the owners instructed you or authorised you to speak on their behalf?
They have not.
So when you make propositions about what's fair to those particular individuals, is it appropriate that you do so without such authorisation?
The fairness is not in relation to their specific case. It's in relation to the fact that the property is sat on the interest layer.
You made an assertion that related to the owners and what was fair to them.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to establish whether you have any basis for doing so.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply or say that it was on behalf of the owners.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. There being no further questions, Mr Price, you may return to the gallery in your seat. Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Now, return to the officers for matters arising.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the Baldwin study, clearly that at the time it was resolved not to proceed with implementing that study. The property was identified and at that particular time, and an amendment hasn't been put afoot as part of that. There are resolutions, and the resolution in 2017 discussed bringing those properties back onto the layer on the basis that there was demand in the community or advocacy was underway by the community to do another look at that study, because at the time there were concerns over buildings being lost. Mm-hmm. So at that particular time, a resolution was made to bring the properties back onto the layer, and the property has been on that layer ever since. And through discussions, as I've said, with the department in the recent weeks, there is an intention to bundle it with a wider amendment that is currently underway, which is Amendment C398, which relates to those post-war buildings. So there is a process, and it has been triggered by Section 29A, because that's the intention of what the database does. It allows the building team, building services, to monitor for Section 29As and then refer those 29As to us so that we can suspend them and seek interim requests. And on that basis, we need an amendment afoot for a permanent heritage overlay in order for them to be able to consider that request on its merits. And a citation has been prepared. It's been made available by Built Heritage, who actually prepared the 2015 study. So on that basis, we're proceeding. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Costello. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question and also would like to foreshadow a motion.
Noted. Thank you.
First, the question. So, mention was made of a list of properties that we keep, and if a 29A is applied for, then as we sit here tonight, we look at the potential for heritage protection. Is it possible that this list could be made public so that people could understand that their properties are on this list in the interest of being transparent and procedural fairness?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Please.
Through you, Chair. Yes, when people call, in this case, my understanding is there were people calling about it. We do let them know at that particular point. But as part of the broader community heritage nomination process, which UPDC has adopted, we intend to make that information public and a bit more transparent. So it will be something that we do as part of that wider process.
Thank you. Could a follow-up question, Chair?
Sure.
What's the and thank you for doing this work, because I believe it's very important. How long is it likely to take for that information to become public so that people can find it in a searchable way, rather than thinking, oh, I wonder if I should bring up and find out if my property's on the list? But how long do you expect this work to take?
It'll be rolled out as part of the wider community heritage nomination process in the next little while. As part of that, there's some other activities we need to do in order to make sure that that work can be resourced with staffing and so on, and that's being worked through at the moment. So we'll make that available, as well as the ability to lodge them, and as part of that, we'll do that work.
Thank you. And Chair, I would like to move the motion as printed on the screen.
We've got some more questions, Councillor Watson,
Yep.
and we'll come back to you.
Thank
Councillor Franco.
Thank you. One question through you, Chair. Councillor Watson asked the other question in a more comprehensive questioning than I was planning to, so thank you. The one that remains for me, just some clarification on a point that Mr. Price made. Mr. Price suggested that stage 3 were the less worthy of the properties as opposed to stage 1 and 2. My understanding was that stage 3 was simply the modernist or post-war properties, and did it not include significant properties, stage 3, like the Robin Boyd property and others that were notably significant?
Thank you, Councillor Franco.
Through you, Chair. Yes, stage 3 is the post-war buildings, and it includes 17 of them.
Okay, including some very significant, I mean, all identified as individually significant, but some
Correct.
very prominently significant, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, going to Councillor Watson's question then, for me to understand then the owners or prospective owners of this property, for instance, was there anything in writing, if they had looked up, that would have said that this house has been considered and no longer is under any consideration? Would they have found that in writing, or would they have just found nothing about it, and then if they had called up and asked specifically, would have been told it is under consideration? Can I just clarify that?
Yes, through you, Chair. The resolution of December in 2017 makes a reference to that property being excluded from that particular amendment, but the question of heritage significance remains. So at that particular time, the scope of the peer review was for buildings earlier than the Second World War. As for the resolution made at that particular time, and there was officer discussion in the report, 25 boroughs would be excluded from that particular amendment because it fitted the post-war era, but that it wasn't necessarily a dismissal of the property's heritage value. It would be tested through a future process, and in this case it will be the trigger of a 29A.
I see, yeah, that's very helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bigger. There'll be no further questions. Councillor Watson, now's the time to move your motion.
Thank you, as printed, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sinfield.
Yes.
We have a seconder. To assist Councillor Watson, is there any opposition to this motion? There's no opposition. So Councillor Watson as the mover, do you wish to speak your motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep my comments brief, but this really does have a bit of history to it. It goes back to 2012 Council and a community that were unwilling to accept mid-century properties as worthy of heritage protection. Now that council made a decision, and in 2016, and that was to not pursue the Baldwin Heritage Study. I was elected in 2016 and I was looking for a way of being able to navigate the politics of a new council, and I felt very strongly and said at the time that I thought that the council had thrown the baby out with the bathwater, because we had beautiful buildings such as the Bowen Cinema sitting there unprotected. So, talking with the officers, I came up with an idea that what about if we look at pre-war, and we'll do that body of work and then see what happens to the balance at another time, but at least get that done. So, and that was done. And at the time, I remember looking at this building, and it was 1946, and our cut-off date was 1945. And there was there had to be a line drawn somewhere, and that's where it got drawn. Looking at this building, it's a beautiful, beautiful building. It's near the Bowen East Kindergarten, where my kids went to school. It's iconic. It's well known in the area. Is it worthy of preservation heritage? Well, I'm not a heritage expert. I'm just a community member, like many others. And it's a building that I certainly admire and think is incredibly beautiful and worthy of preservation. But I will leave that up to the experts, and also to my colleagues here tonight, urge them to support this amendment, urge them to support this recommendation, this motion before them. Hopefully understanding a little bit of the tortured history, we've got proposal for a little bit more transparency, so that our community don't continually have bombs going off of owning properties and wanting to do things, and all of a sudden finding things about their property that they didn't know before, which was perhaps a heritage citation. So I'm happy that we have a solution going forward that's going to be a little bit easier for our community, and I certainly support the motion tonight and commend this to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And there being no opposition, I will now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors, and thank you very much, officers, and those that presented this evening. Next item is general business. Councillors, are there any matters arising from general business? No general business. We'll move to urgent business. Are there any matters of urgent business? There are none. Brings us now to the close of the meetings. But before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank you all who has joined us this evening and online, and I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you very much.